W. Trimpe. Herb Trimpe.
¡Aplausos, por favor! A ver, ¿perdón?
El micrófono.
No se escucha. Okay. Apparently,
Does my mic not work?
Black one's better. I'll just go ahead and switch, no problem.
Okay, how's that?
Is that better?
Better.
¿Cómo está?
Yeah, I'm kind of used to screening, so there's no problem here. Okay, so basically this, we're going to try to concentrate on the licenses, but you can just go ahead and talk about anything you want.
Oh,
this is your... Una de las cosas más importantes que les quiero decir, que acabo de conocer al señor Trimpe fue el jueves, y cuando le comenté que iba a venir disfrazado de Doc Samson, para mí la mejor y más grande creación del señor Herb Trimpe con Roy Thomas, algo muy bonito pasó, agarró y me contó una historia detrás de las escenas del personaje y de qué fue la inspiración para el personaje. Captain Tootsie story. Y yo creo que una de las cosas más importantes de tener a los creadores aquí es que todas las preguntas que todos hemos tenido acerca de 20,000 cosas acerca de los personajes, ellos no nos pueden resolver. Entonces, would you like to start with anything?
In terms of Captain
No.
Doc Samson?
Actually, one of the things that I really want to talk to you about is on Thursday, when we did the whole press thing, you mentioned that the reason that you did the licenses was because there was more money in it.
Oh yeah. Well,
and I thought that was very interesting, you know, because a lot of people do it, we do it for the art, I do it for this, I do it for that, but you were very honest and said, hey.
Well, no, I did it. A lot of the licensed characters were not interesting to some of the other artists that worked for Marvel. They were difficult to do. They involved, for instance, in G.I. Joe, many characters, many different types of weapons and equipment, and new things were coming out every month, and a lot of the artists, it was much too difficult, too time-consuming to actually, you know, spend on that kind of work. Of course, another licensing was Godzilla, and that was a little bit easier because it was a single character. But the problem is he was in the city all the time, which meant drawing building after building after building, and window after window after window, doors, and all mechanical perspective stuff. So that was quite a labor also. One of the other licensing projects was, of course, Transformers, and all you have to do is look at a Transformer and realize what the problem is with that. The characters are extremely complicated. There was never a time I didn't need extensive reference to draw the characters in front of me from all different angles. I'd never committed any of those characters to memory. Prior to that, I had done Shogun Warriors.
I remember those.
And Shogun Warriors were a lot simpler. I actually memorized those. I could do them without looking at, and there were only 3 of them. Maybe.
Can you give me 1 second? Let me kind of explain who the Shogun Warriors. ¿Todos saben quiénes fueron los Shogun Warriors? ¿Sí? ¿Sí? ¿No? No tengan miedo de preguntar en serio, es mi placer decirles quiénes son. Lo que pasa cuando estaba saliendo Godzilla, también estaban saliendo varios robots de japoneses gigantescos que se peleaban igual con otro tipo de monstruos, al igual que con Godzilla. Como fue un hit el cómic de Godzilla, también Marvel hizo los Shogun Warriors, que eran 3 robots gigantes que se peleaban con Godzilla y con otros monstruos.
Yeah, Shogun Warriors were directly from Japan, as was Godzilla. And at first there was resistance in the United States using the characters or marketing the toys because they were fairly large. They were about that high. And they shot rockets and fists and things, and they considered them too dangerous for Los Niños and Estados Unidos.
They were just a lot of fun. I had a bunch of them.
muy peligroso.
Well, you know, everything's kind of dangerous if you can put it in your mouth, but you know, you kind of have to learn to not stick things in your mouth, right? That's what I'm thinking. And also, one thing that's kind of funny too, as you mentioned, a lot of the artists didn't want to do the licensing, but things like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Godzilla, they already had a following. But you did something that was, to me, is amazing. I don't know about you guys. G.I. Joe became a gigantic, enormous hit for Marvel.
It did.
And only you wanted to do it. It's amazing. Nobody wanted to do it.
Well, the interesting part is I think I only did 6 issues.
I know, but you did number 1. It's my
I did
first.
number 1. Somebody else did number 2. Because again, it was a nightmare to do it. You couldn't make. See, the thing is, we were paid by page rate.
Okay.
So the more pages that you drew, the more money you made. And I could make much faster progress on the Hulk, say, because it's a single character, and in addition to whatever the villain of the month happened to be at the time.
Plus, he was always in the desert, right?
And he was quite often outside, and the desert is very easy to draw. It's a straight line and a cactus.
So there you go. Yeah. No wonder you did like what 20 years or so.
I did about 90. Well, over a period of 96 issues, I did 8. I worked 8 years on the Hulk. There was a few in between that I didn't do. I might have been called out to do something else at the time. I got behind in the schedule, and somebody else needed to finish it off. I'm really not sure about that.
Yeah. I remember those Hulk. They were just bizarre and crazy because they kept introducing bad guys, and the next one was crazier than the last. I remember you introduced the Harpy, which was Penny Ross with gamma radiation. You introduced the Bibies, gigantic beast with 2 heads, a floating city, and then the leader was there like every other day. I think you did MODOK also, the big head, no arms. I kind of love those crazy monsters.
The leader was a great character, I thought, but the other ones, obviously, many were designed like on the spot as the story was being drawn. There was just a general concept that this character would be able to do that and the other thing. And, it was totally left up to me to come up with a character. Unfortunately, none of those characters went anywhere. I mean, they pretty much went by the wayside.
But you got one that just went all the way to Hollywood, You did Wolverine, so there you go. So
and I only did 2, 1 panel and 2 books with Wolverine.
I know, and sadly, that's the one everybody knows, and not Doc Samson, who is the greatest Marvel character ever. But of course, nobody believes me. I just adore Doc Samson. I think it's true. Oh no, they said they don't want translation.
No translation.
That's
the difference between Mexico and the United States. Very few people here need translation, and everybody in the U.S. needs translation.
You see, the thing is, everybody here kind of reads their comic books in English.
Yes.
So, they learn from early on.
Yes.
That's another question. Same thing with Transformers and G.I. Joe. You had a cast of thousands. How hard was it, when you had to do a battle between the Transformers, the good guys, the Autobots, and the Decepticons? I mean, how hard was that?
Yeah, it was. Well, one thing, there was a tendency in some of the machinery, which really isn't clearly defined in the first place. Most of the reference I had, actually I had the toys as reference, but the toys kind of take shortcuts.
Okay.
The shapes have to be a little bit more general. In a drawing, you can add detail that really doesn't work physically. So there was a kind of a balance between the two in terms of drawing those characters. But again, it was very, very time consuming to draw those magazines.
I can imagine. Now, also in different licensing, you did also Star Wars. You did Indiana Jones. Am I correct?
Yo no sé. No, Indiana Jones, yeah.
How tough with the Lucasfilm people? Because I've read interviews with John Byrne and Peter David, and they say that people just go nuts if you don't get the face just right, if you don't get the costume just right, if the story is not quite up to par, if the panel doesn't indicate what the character is supposed to be completely according to the films. How tough was that?
I didn't have too much experience with the Star Wars stuff. I don't think I did too many, but the Indiana Jones, we were never bothered with.
Really?
Well, I don't remember. The only thing that we were really bothered about, that we were called out on, and we had one of the issues of Indiana Jones, I plotted the story. And I didn't know at the time that Indiana Jones Temple of Doom was almost exactly like the story that I had written.
Okay.
And the movie was in a production stage, so I had no knowledge of the movie. You know, it was totally coincidental. And so when the plot went to the Indiana Jones people, they said, you know, you can't do that. We're doing this, and we're doing this in a movie.
It's going to be released in like the summer.
But but other than that, I mean, you know, we pretty much had free reign. My likenesses weren't always very good. I did had a couple of inkers that I thought did quite good work on the story, and I really enjoyed. Elliot Brown was writing it, and I was drawing it. We had many ideas to move into the future with that, and suddenly the book was just yanked away. It was just, I don't even think it was dropped. I think they got a different creative team for it, and we were out. It was done.
I remember, now that you mentioned about your likeness, one thing that I remember from reading your Hulk, the face you gave the Hulk, it was just like so brutish, so ugly, so unlike a human being almost, you know, very monstrous, you know, kind of like what Jack Kirby was doing with the Thing. Was that your intention to make it that ugly, or?
Well, the first Hulks I drew were pretty bizarre. It was like on-the-job training, as it were. I was kind of learning as I worked. Because my natural style prior to working at Marvel was entirely different. I was basically a cartoonist. I was a big EC Comics fan, and my favorite artist was Jack Davis, who had a cartoony kind of, but very exciting and adventurous style. He did a lot of TV magazine, TV guide covers, and other kinds of illustrations, plus the comics that he was doing for EC at the time. And he was absolutely, you know, I thought he was just the best. And unfortunately for me, that style did not work with Stan Lee. I mean, it just didn't. So I started to have to look around at some of the guys that were doing this stuff there, and I really couldn't draw in a very illustrative way, so I struggled with it for years and years, to the point that I'm still struggling with it. I mean, and I'm not even drawing comics anymore. I mean, I draw. I'm drawing covers for IDW in California, the present day G.I. Joe licensees. I'm drawing those covers. But I mean, it was just, you know, ever since I actually started to work at Marvel, I groped around for years and years and years. And there's a fan that's in communication with quite a bit. And he always tells me that I was the man of many styles.
Well, that's very true. In fact, I remember reading Fantastic Four Quarterly.
It's because I didn't know what I was doing.
Okay, well, okay, if you want to go ahead and say that. But I remember you did a Fantastic Four Quarterly, like around the 90s, and your art just went a whole different route.
Yeah, that was the end of the line. The fans got mad at me for that. Well, actually, they got mad at Marvel for that, because they said, oh my God, they're making you draw differently. They're making you draw like those other guys are drawing. And they weren't. I just was looking at, you know, I didn't have at one point prior to Fantastic Four Unlimited, I did not have regular work. So I got an inventory story to do. It was an X Factor book. And I did the pencils, and I started to just go through the comics that these other guys were doing, and I said, I can do that. You know? So it was one of many styles. And when I sent the artwork in, when it arrived in the editor's office, for the next 2 or 3 days, it was used as an example of guess who did this. They were asking people into the office and saying, guess who did this? And when nobody could guess, nobody had any idea. And I was getting very high compliments on it from the editorial staff, but the fans, they didn't like it at all.
Too much too soon, right? Too much change?
Too much, I don't know.
Okay.
It was too much too soon, yeah.
Let's see if they have a question. ¿Alguno de ustedes tiene alguna pregunta para el señor Trimpe? No tengan pena, es hoy o nunca. Puede ser que nunca lo vean, a ver.
Pregunta, por favor.
No, don't be scared.
Don't be scared.
He's not the Hulk. You won't get mad. A ver, ¿tenemos un micrófono?
My wife says I am the Hulk.
Oh, well, there you go. She would know better than me. A ver, pues acércate, compañero.
Hi there. Daniel Kurtz, big fan of yours. Okay, I'm Daniel Kurtz. Very nice to meet you. My question is, in Star Wars, what kind of work did you do? Is there a specific number or title?
I don't, the only...
¿Todos escucharon la pregunta? ¿Sí? ¿No? Está preguntando qué título de Star Wars hizo o qué números de Star Wars hizo. I'm sorry.
No, it's quite not only acceptable but necessary. The only thing I remember about doing Star Wars, there was one story, or it might have been the only one I did, I don't know. But it was it went back to when he was young, and he was flying with that friend of his that
big starlighter
that they mentioned in the first movie when they talk about running through these canyons back on I don't know, Tatooine, his home planet. Yeah. I'm sorry. That's the only thing I remember about Star Wars.
Sorry about this.
I might add that I'm an aviation fan I love airplanes, and I have a private pilot's license, and so anything that had to do with flying really worked for me, because I got to draw airplanes. So that's kind of why I like that whole sequence that I got to do in Star Wars. That's probably why I remember it, because it had to do with flying.
We have a next question right here. A ver, señor.
¿En qué fue lo que se inspiraron para el personaje de Wolverine? O sea, ¿qué fue lo que los llevó para crear ese personaje?
Of course, the requisite Wolverine question. ¿Escucharon todos la pregunta? What was your inspiration for creating Wolverine?
Okay, the creation of Wolverine. One more time.
How many times do you get asked?
Tiempo. Más veces. Somebody yesterday asked me in a group this. They said, "Where did Wolverine come from?" I said, "From his mommy." It was a product of. It was a typical Marvel throwaway character that was basically necessary or seemed to be interesting for the storyline at the time. I believe the Hulk was isolated somehow in Canada, and the main adversary, his main villain at that point in the storyline was Wendigo had entered the scene. So Roy Thomas, who was assistant to Stan, had an idea that it might be a good idea to come up with a Canadian superhero, anti-hero, however you wanted to look at it, For what reason, I don't know. Maybe because that's where the story was. Maybe they were... I always suspected it had to do with appealing to the Canadian comic book buying market. They wanted to sell more comics in Canada. That could have been it. But anyway, it was basically his idea. It was the writer on the book at the time was Len Wein, and John Romita was the art director, even though he didn't have that title. But he was basically the art director, and he made decisions that Stan would approve of or not approve of. And so, with the concept basically coming from Roy, and then there was a lot of preliminary drawings. When I say a lot, it might have been a 2-day project thing. I don't know. It wasn't very long because we're running monthly deadlines and things had to happen very quickly. So eventually, it was decided upon. It was probably a committee effort in a way as to kind of what he should look like. So John did the final model sheet that the artist would work from when they were going to use Wolverine in a story. Of course, the part that Len had was, to supply the dialogue and to direct the kinds of things that Wolverine would say, the way he said them, when he would say them. In other words, he gave the Wolverine voice. Where the way I look at it, I gave the Wolverine life. There was a certain, my basic responsibility was to turn the character into something that was interesting in the comic book itself. And so therefore, I didn't put a whole lot of thinking into a lot of the comic book work I did because it's very hard to explain how quickly we did a lot of these things. They were just like shooting from the hip, it's like Wild West. But it was decided upon, and I got to define the character in terms of movement and action, which was I thought at the time, like everybody else, nobody gave it a second thought. There was no future thought about, oh, gee, this character has possibility. No, there was nothing like that.
There's something really funny that I find from every fan that I've ever met. In fact, I have a radio show, Comiconexión, todos los miércoles de 5 a 7. And basically, everybody kind of thinks that people were creating comic books, thinking that 40 years later, 60 years later, they would still be talking about them. But no, you were just trying to, earn a paycheck, and thankfully, you gave us just this amazing world that we can just get lost in.
My model was the older generation, the generation before me. Ramirez, Jack Kirby, Gene Colan, the Buscema's, those guys. And they were just, craftsmen. They did the work, they went home to their families. There wasn't a huge fan base then. Although sales were much, much higher in those days. When I was on the Hulk, I think it probably peaked out at 450,000 copies a month. When I ended at Marvel, I was doing a Fantastic Four Unlimited, which was a quarterly, and that was being printed with a maximum of 30,000 copies a print run. So the amount of books being sold then compared to now, there's really no comparison. The big difference is fan interest now. Fan interest is monumental now. It's mind-boggling to me that I would be sitting here talking about something that I did 40 years ago. I mean, it's just
in a different country.
In a different country, and what it's done for me personally is it's given me an appreciation of the work that I did at the time because of the feedback from you guys. that at the time, I really didn't consider that important. You know, it was on to the next book, on to the next paycheck, on to the next going home and paying the bills. That was all there really was to it.
Talking about feedback, we have more questions over here.
Buenas tardes.
Yo se le voy a preguntar en español. Básicamente es de G.I. Joe. ¿Cuál es el personaje que más le gusta, sí, o carácter el que más le gusta de G.I. Joe? ¿Y qué tan difícil fue combinar G.I. Joe con Transformers?
I think my favorite characters connected to the time period that I had the most fun working at Marvel, and that was probably the first 10 years. And during that 10-year period, I was drawing the Hulk. It wasn't my best work by any means, but you know, the storytelling was always good, which is I think why Stan hired me in the first place. And I was a good storyteller, and we really did have the most fun during that time. Then, you know, in later years when we became part of when Martin Goodman, who was Stan Lee's uncle, was the editor-in-chief of a company called Magazine Management. And Marvel Comics was just one branch of that publishing company. But when he sold the company and we became incorporated with some of the bigger companies, that's when things wasn't so much fun anymore, because they were really more interested in, they weren't as willing to accept failure and work around it and move on to something else. The mentality slowly started to become, okay, and this is pure marketing strategy. Whatever sells, let's do more of that. And so a lot of the creativity went out of the business. And then over the next, you know, the last 10 years was hell. I mean, it really was. It was like, you know, it was like a bunker mentality, you know, the Nazis in the bunker, you know.
You know, that's normal because everybody kind of thinks of Marvel or DC as great places to work at, and everybody's having fun in the bullpen, and just this electricity, this dynamic, just of everybody just switching ideas, and basically at the end of the day, it's work. You gotta get up early, go home late, and do your job.
It was absolutely, when it was good, it was probably the best job that anybody could be lucky to have, and I really did consider myself lucky because I was surrounded by so many talented artists, and I really couldn't draw as well as they could. So it was quite, that first 10 years was quite a time period.
Let's see, we have another question. Come right over here.
No, yo también le voy a hablar español. ¿Usted ya ha pensado en seguir haciendo personajes para películas o historietas?
¿Escucharon bien? ¿No? Le preguntó al señor si sigue pensando en hacer personajes para historietas o para películas. Cualquier pregunta que tengan que no hayan escuchado, por favor, con gusto. Para eso estamos. ¿Alguna otra pregunta más? ¿No? Bueno.
No, one of the ways we make income now is doing commissions for fans, usually through the internet, or I have a friend that is an agent and sells artwork online, that kind of thing on the internet. And I'm doing those covers for IDW, and that's a very loose schedule, and I think that's about all I would want to do at this point. And the truth of the matter is, I couldn't get work in mainline comics now if I wanted to. Not that I would want to. Although, you know, if somebody sticks the money in front of your face, God knows what I do. I might.
You and everybody else.
I really can't say what I do for sure. But I would not willingly attempt or have an ambition to go out of my way to try to get work in comics now. I'm not interested in it.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? They must be just scared of you, and I don't get this. Either that, or every question they had was about Wolverine, and you're probably sick of that. Oh, really? Oh, that's so sad. Because, you know, I mean, you were working at Marvel in its best moment in the 70s. You took over DC, I mean, you just went right over it, and it was just some of the best storytelling ever. I mean,
yeah, it was good story.
Jack Kirby had just left, and everybody thought Marvel was just going to go down the drains, but it didn't. It went higher than ever. Roy Thomas was taking over Avengers. You were doing Hulk. Wolverine was introduced. A bunch of characters came around. The X-Men were the new X-Men back then with Chris Claremont, then later John Byrne. First was Dave Cockrum.
It was very exciting.
The most amazing time that I can imagine. I mean, just to be a fly on the wall there. Just characters coming.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
How come your English is so good?
Oh, well. Everybody hates when I talk about myself except me, but it goes like this. I lived in the U.S. for 8 years, from when I was 10 years old to when I was 18.
Formidable years.
Yeah, oh yeah. And the thing is, really, it was like during the latter part of the 80s, because I'm only 25, right? So here you go. I had already discovered comic books when I was living here, but I had not here. There was no such thing as a direct comic book shop. You couldn't buy them direct. You had to go to like the supermarket or something, right? So the thing is, when I first get there, the direct market had just started up. So I went to my first store, and there were just tons and tons and tons of back issue. I just went crazy, and I just bought everything. You know, this is why I have such a great memory of those times, because it's a very creative moment, you know? And it just, I'm flabbergasted that you have no more questions. This man lived, he walked the path right behind Stan Lee, behind Roy Thomas.
These guys are good. Very polite.
Oh, there we go.
Extremely polite.
And I think it's just great. I mean, you could be missing the opportunity of a lifetime to talk to a legend. Oh, you want?
No.
Okay, we have a question right over here.
All I keep thinking about is the grass I have to cut when I go home.
Well, my question is, do you feel with all the technology and the new programs of the computer, do you think it's easier or more difficult for a new drawer? It's easier or more difficult for someone to get in that industry?
One second, nobody heard the question. Es que de aquí tiene que salir la pregunta. La señorita está preguntándose ahora con todo el nuevo software y con toda la nueva tecnología de por computadora si es más difícil o más fácil para un artista entrar en el medio. ¿Estamos de acuerdo? Okay.
I think the two things are separate, but it's much harder to get into at least American comics than it was when I did. We were the second company below DC Comics. We were putting out less than 20 titles a month, and many of those were reprint titles from work that had been done already. And I had a friend that I went to art school with, and he landed a job at Marvel. He was the production chief, and he also was a very good comic book artist, and he did some comic book art on the side. John Reporton was his name. And when I got out of the military, I was in the Air Force for 4 years during the Vietnam period, and he said, you know, if you have any samples, bring them up to the office. Well, you know, I had the only samples I had went back to art school. So I went up there and I immediately got work doing inking westerns. Now, that doesn't happen today like that. The whole process of submitting artwork is very complicated. I think it was a point that DC was only accepting samples through the comic book show in Chicago, the Wizard World show in Chicago. There was an application process there where you could bring samples and they would look at the samples and they would pick a few top, you know, it was kind of like a beauty contest. and you couldn't, there was no way you were going to get into their office. When I first started working with Marvel, anybody could walk into the office and show their work. I mean, they were quite happy to look. Marvel also has a process for applying to do work, and that is, it's a lot better. And you can do it anytime you want. You can go to their website. I actually went to their website to see what the guidelines were, but you can submit artwork via the internet to Marvel, whether you're a writer or an inker or a colorist, anything along those lines. Where it goes beyond that, I have no idea. But it was different, much different.
Sadly, they say that time flies when you're having fun. And we're done. Les dije que se les acababa la oportunidad de así de un segundo para otro. Ya me prohíben pedir preguntas porque ya se tiene que ir el señor Herb Trimpe. Un aplauso, por favor. Me están informando que el señor Herb Trimpe va a estar dando autógrafos, ¿verdad?
Sí, es en México. Comics. Bueno, Comics México, perdón. En la entrada tenemos el stand de Comics México. Ahí el señor Trimpe va a poder revisar sus portafolios y va a poder dar autógrafos. Les pedimos por favor, porque en este momento ya tenemos a la gente de iTrax Studio, los creadores de Sabel y de Bricks 3D, que nos van a dar una conferencia sobre la animación. Está el señor Benito Fernández y su equipo. Por favor, les vamos a pedir las personas interesadas en México Comics, en la entrada iba a estar dando el señor Trimpe los autógrafos y pues los esperamos, no se retiren porque inmediatamente continúa la conferencia de iTrax Studio. Después de la conferencia de Benito Fernández tenemos aquí mismo a las 2:45 el reencuentro de los colaboradores de La Caneca y a las 3:10 un homenaje a la primera cinta de dibujos animados